Have you ever wondered what life would have been like in ancient Greece? Imagine stepping back in time to an era spanning from the 8th century to the 1st century BC, where the Mediterranean region was dominated by this spectacular civilization. Ancient Greece wasn't just a time and place. It was a crucible of ideas and innovations that have shaped the world as we know it today. It was an epicenter of progress, giving birth to democracy, philosophy, art, and literature, the echoes of which can still be heard in modern society. But let's not romanticize it too much. Life in ancient Greece was not a walk in the park. It presented its fair share of challenges and hardships. Survival was a daily struggle, navigating through wars, diseases, natural disasters, and economic disparities. Now let us dive into the details of survival in ancient Greece, starting with birth and childhood. The journey of life in ancient Greece began with high risks. This was a time and place where the joy of birth was often shadowed by the specter of death. Infant mortality rates were alarmingly high, with a significant number of newborns not surviving past their first year. The causes were many, ranging from disease to malnutrition and even exposure to the elements. In contrast to our modern sensibilities, a newborn in ancient Greece was not immediately considered a full member of the family. The father had to acknowledge the child, a ritual that involved presenting the baby to the household gods. If this did not occur, the infant was, sadly, often abandoned, left to the mercy of the elements and wild animals. For those children who did survive infancy, life didn't exactly get easier. The concept of childhood as a time of innocence and play was largely absent in ancient Greece. Instead, children were viewed as miniature adults, and they were expected to contribute to the family and society from an early age. Boys would often follow their fathers, learning their trades and starting to work as soon as they were physically able. Girls, on the other hand, were typically taught the domestic arts by their mothers, preparing them for their future roles as wives and mothers. Education, as we understand it today, was a privilege of the elite. Only the children of the wealthy and powerful had access to tutors and schools where they could study subjects such as philosophy, rhetoric, and mathematics. So, life for a child in ancient Greece was filled with hardship and responsibility, a far cry from the carefree days of play and learning that we associate with childhood today. Surviving childhood was indeed a feat in itself. But what about diseases? The threat of diseases was a constant companion in ancient Greece. The knowledge of medical science was still in its infancy, and hygiene practices were far from what we would deem acceptable today. This lack of understanding and practice often led to frequent outbreaks of diseases and epidemics, turning them into silent predators, lurking in the shadows. Imagine a world where the germ theory of disease wasn't known yet, and the basic concept of washing hands after visiting the loo was not a norm. Yes, that was ancient Greece for you. With such deficient hygiene practices, it's hardly a surprise that diseases spread like wildfire, claiming lives and instilling fear in the hearts of people. Malaria, a disease we have now managed to control to a great extent, was a major killer in ancient Greece. It was so widespread that it was often referred to as the plague of Athens. The disease was not understood, and treatments were ineffective, leading to countless deaths. Speaking of plagues, the plague of Athens wasn't just a metaphor. It was a devastating epidemic that struck the city-state of Athens in 5th century BC. The plague claimed an estimated 1/3 of the population, including prominent figures like Pericles, the leader of Athens. The cause of the plague remains a mystery, but it serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of life in ancient Greece. Tuberculosis, another silent killer, was prevalent too. With no knowledge of bacteria and how they spread, the disease was often left unchecked until it was too late. The lack of effective treatments meant that tuberculosis was often a death sentence. Health was a constant battle, but so was maintaining peace. In the next scene, we'll delve into the wars and violence that were as much a part of ancient Greek life as the looming threat of disease. In ancient Greece, the specter of war and violence was ever looming. This was a society where the clash of spears and shields was more frequent than the strumming of lyres. The city-states, or polis, of ancient Greece were constantly at odds with each other, their rivalries often erupting into full-blown wars. The Peloponnesian War, for instance, was a decades-long conflict between Athens and Sparta, the two most powerful city-states of the era. It was a war that saw alliances shift like sand dunes in a desert storm, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. The death toll was immense, not only among the soldiers on the battlefield, but also among the civilians caught in the crossfire or succumbing to the famine and disease that often accompanied war. But it wasn't just between city-states where violence was commonplace. Within the city walls, too, the sword often held sway over words. The political landscape of ancient Greece was as volatile as its geology. Political assassinations, public executions, and violent revolts were all too common. Even in Athens, the cradle of democracy, violence was a tool often used to settle political disputes. The world of ancient Greece was one where the strong preyed upon the weak. Slavery was an integral part of the society, and slaves were often subjected to harsh treatments and punishments. The arenas were another testament to the violent nature of the society. Gladiatorial battles, often to the death, were a popular form of entertainment. In the final analysis, it's clear that the idyllic images of ancient Greece, the philosophers musing under olive trees, the poets reciting verses to the strumming of lyres, were only one part of the picture. The other part was a world where the drum beats of war were a constant backdrop and where the price of survival was often steeped in blood. While man-made disasters took their toll, nature too played its part. Mother Nature was no less forgiving in ancient Greece. The land was often shaken by the wrath of the gods, or so the ancients believed. Earthquakes were frequent, tearing down homes and temples, leaving devastation in their wake. The Greek islands, particularly those in the Aegean Sea, were vulnerable to these seismic activities due to the tectonic movements beneath the Earth's crust. Flooding was yet another trial the Greeks had to endure. Heavy rains would often swell the rivers, inundating the surrounding plains and villages. Crops were destroyed, livestock swept away, and the hard work of the people washed out in a moment. And let's not forget the volcanic eruptions, the most famous of which was the eruption of Santorini around the mid-2nd millennium BCE. This catastrophic event not only erased entire settlements, but also triggered a tsunami that affected regions as far as Egypt. As if natural disasters weren't enough, economic hardships added to the struggle. Economic inequalities were another harsh reality of life in ancient Greece. The economic structure of ancient Greek society was highly polarized, with a vast chasm separating the wealthy from the poor. At one end of the spectrum, the aristocracy reveled in opulence and grandeur, their lives characterized by lavish banquets, grand estates, and a steady stream of luxury goods from far-flung corners of the Greek world. Yet, this was not the reality for the majority of ancient Greeks. The common people, often referred to as the demos, were predominantly farmers, laborers, and slaves, living a life of hardship and toil. The income disparity was stark, and the lower classes often found themselves living on the brink of subsistence. Hunger was a constant companion, and the threat of famine lurked around every corner. The economic hardships were compounded by the heavy taxes imposed by the city-states, leaving the poor in an even more precarious position. Debt was a common problem, and those unable to pay their debts could even be sold into slavery, further deepening the economic divide. In the midst of these struggles, the ancient Greeks displayed an indomitable spirit. They were resilient and resourceful, finding ways to survive and even thrive in the face of adversity. They developed innovative farming techniques to maximize their crop yields, engaged in trade with neighboring regions, and even turned to craftsmanship and artistry as alternate sources of income. But despite their best efforts, life for the majority remained a struggle, a daily battle against poverty and deprivation. Yet it is this very struggle that makes the achievements of ancient Greece all the more remarkable. As we have seen, surviving in ancient Greek was a constant struggle, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Despite the economic hardships, the people persevered, their determination shaping the course of history and leaving a legacy that continues to resonate today.